you know, I kind of think of tweets. I mean, I love the fact, because we have a tweet deck here at the newsroom, and it's like, it's incredible how much stuff people happen to know out in the world. But again, so much of it is just garbage. I sort of think of tweets, at least I originally thought of tweets, as sort of like scanners. We have scanners where we kind of pick up traffic. Yeah. But just because that doesn't become news. Just because you think you hear something over a scanner, we always had to check our sources and all of that. Right. Is that the level at which you deal with tweets? It's like, oh, here's a possibility. Somebody just said X was shot or something, and so we then check it out? Or?
That's right. You got to check it out. You know, it is really helpful as an early warning system for breaking news. But that's all it is. You can't treat it as the breaking news itself. Yeah. You have to find actual sources for it. That's what separates us from bloggers, or separates us from random people. Yes.
Well, and speaking of bloggers, so I think the movie mentioned that the New York Times employs bloggers. Yeah. Correct? Yeah. Like something like 70 or 80?
Yeah, we have 70 or 80 blogs on the site.
Okay. Now by what rules do those guys play, and do they play by different rules than you or someone else at the august print side?
This might sound crazy, but we play by the same rules.
Is that right?
I've tried, actually, to get away with different standards, and it doesn't work. We still have to have multiple sources. We still have to check it out. It still has to be edited before it's posted, which is, it's a thorn in my side, because I'd like to get news up as fast as I can, but we still need editors, and frankly, I'm glad we have them. They catch my mistakes.
So you have editors of your blogs?
Yeah, we do.
But not of your tweets?
Not of my tweets. Yeah. Twitter is the one place where we are unedited. Yeah. But we still bring that same ethic to Twitter. I don't post something that I don't know. And if I don't know it, I say very clearly, this is a rumor that we're checking out.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting.
The night that Osama bin Laden was killed, there was word about 15 minutes before we heard it officially from the White House. When we were posting that, sort of it wasn't speculation because it was trusted sources, but it wasn't quite confirmed yet either.
Sources,
you got to be upfront about that and explain exactly what you know and what you don't know, because what you don't know sometimes more valuable, more interesting.
And then the criticism of the way we are in general doing journalism is that one rumor, something that no one else would ever print, say something about John Edwards or something, no one would normally print, but because you have different avenues that have lower standards, then you, as the traditional media, can say, well, on Gawker or someplace, they're reporting this, and then you can then end up getting the story in. Right. How comfortable are you with that? Is that an unfair backdoor, or do you think, like, this is the world we live in, you can't ignore the fact that this is out there?
I generally think the horse is out of the barn, that if someone reports something, if it's getting enough traction online, we're going to have to acknowledge it. But we can put it in context. Yeah. Just because we report it doesn't mean we have to put it on the front page. Doesn't mean we have to give it as much credence as, say, TMZ might be giving it. Yeah. It's important to put things in context and to show how important or unimportant they are, while still acknowledging that we hear what's out there.
Yeah. So, speaking of TMZ, are they one of the best things that's happened recently, or one of the worst things?
I'm relatively pro TMZ because they're aggressive. They are hungry for news. I wish they applied that same hunger to more important topics, but they're hungry and they are chasing stories. Now, I don't know if they're paying off hospital workers or ambulance drivers. A lot of people think they are, and they might be, and that does make me uncomfortable. But I love their motivation to get stories and their obsession with owning stories that they have. Yeah. And so since you're dealing with media, where does this whole celebrity journalism world work for you? How significant do you take it? How seriously do you take it? We just, had entertainment tonight, just Mary Hart stepping down for 29 years, and you talk about how the landscape had changed, and it's hard to argue with that. In some ways, that's as significant as the Oprah impact. How much entertainment journalism has blossomed. Good or bad, upside, downside of that? Well, I wish we'd apply some of the tactics of entertainment journalism to more serious journalism. They know how to get sexy images. They know how to get interesting camera angles. They know how to really hype something up and promote something in a way that, frankly, I wish I knew how to apply better to my work. Sometimes it's all about the packaging. Or not all about the packaging, but sometimes it's a lot about the packaging. Yeah. And what Entertainment Tonight and TMZ show me is how to package news. We could be doing a better job of packaging our own information.
But don't you think that what they're packaging, though, is already, by its very nature, sexier than...
Well, that's true. I mean, a lot of what they're feeding us is concentrated sugar. It's like M&Ms or Starbursts. But maybe there's some way to give what we're doing, which is more serious, a sugary taste.
Nice idea. Good ambition, at least. Okay, now let's look at the other side. How much of the serious news of the day, however you define it, is lacking because the world is now run by aggregators and by tweets and by, you know, just the blogs and everything else. I mean, it's one thing that, what I like about it is that it opens avenues of information and access to, you know, readers and listeners and everything else. At the same time, is like your brain only has so much room for information, and they're shoving other information that we used to get 10, 20, 30 years ago out.
I think you're onto something, that sometimes more is not better. Sometimes less is better. I keep wanting to create a site where we just have one paragraph summaries of the story. You know, the best summary, just here's all you really need to know is this little tidbit of information.
Yeah, like a little digest.
Yeah, we're gonna have to give people different versions of information like that, I think. Otherwise, we are gonna lose them to sites that can just sum it up and aggregate it and link to information. You know, I think it's incumbent upon news consumers to look for original sources. That's one of the biggest themes of Page One. In fact, there's this whole social campaign around the film called Consider the Source. It's just encouraging people to think about where their news comes from. I don't have any problem with people going to the Huffington Post and reading a version of my story there, but hopefully they'll click back to the original story also, so they can see what we meant, you know, what the context of the story is.
But what do you think the likelihood of that is? That's the problem. When
we got to get the word out about that. You know, that's the hard part. It's really media literacy 101, isn't it?
Yeah. So how much? That's fascinating though, because I have never had a story that then was picked up by Huffington Post and redone. What is the difference between your original post in the New York Times and how it appears on Huffington?
Oh, it's shorter. It's got a sexier headline. Sometimes a less accurate headline, but a sexier headline.
Yeah.
And it's you know, got a lot of comments and noise around it. It's more colorful. You know, the packaging, actually, they're better at packaging.
Yeah.
There are times where I will tweet something on Twitter because I don't think it's worth posting on the New York Times website.
Yeah.
Then Huffington Post will take it, put it up as a news story. Take my tweet, make it a news story. You know, that's where we talk about lowering standards. Actually.
Yeah.
That's where, and it's okay for sites to have different standards, but we should be aware of those standards.
Yeah, but here's the problem, though, is how do you determine what is news if more people want to know what you said in your tweet than what is happening in Libya right now?
Well, we can't ignore that. You know, we have to be aware of that. And in fact, I mentioned the Huffington Post example because another time 2 weeks ago I was going to tweet a little bit of news that I didn't think was very important, but I knew Huffington Post was going to think it was. So I put it up on the New York Times website. I changed my views of how important it was.
Wow.
Thinking about the customer there, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to evolve along with the consumer.
And can you tell me who goes to the Huffington Post as opposed to the New York Times website? Do you know that distinction?
I think a lot of times it's random. You know, when I type in, if I'm interested, today I'm interested in Yemen. There seems to be increasing instability in that country. I'll go to Google News, type in the word Yemen, and see what pops up.
Yeah.
It's a little scary that we put so much trust and faith in those algorithms of those computers.
Yeah.
Hopefully those computers will get better and better at pulling out the original sources. But for now, I think a lot of it is random.
So here's my question for you. How is it, are you a nervous wreck all the time? Because even as I'm interviewing you, things are happening in this world that you're missing. Does that bother you?
I'm going to write a story after we head out of here. In the car. Just a little story. You know, if it's under 300 words, you can write it on your iPhone without too much of a problem.
Huh.
No, you know, I'm not a nervous wreck because I try to think about what actually matters. And the stories that matter don't happen that often. Oprah leaving her show really matters.
That's a big deal.
That's a one every 25 years. You have to take a big swing at that. But the ratings for last night's show matter a lot less.
Yeah.
So I'm going to worry a lot less about that. And a lot of it was put in perspective for me over the weekend. I went down to Joplin to cover the tornado there. A sort of a detour from my normal beat about television.
Yeah.
But obviously a very different story. And it reminded me that that's the news that probably is most valuable. That's the news people most want access to. We got to get those stories right, and we got to cover them in depth. Because at the end of the day, I can cover Oprah, and that's important, but we're going to have to be in stories in towns where the news really affects people's lives.
Now, so if you're in Joplin, what did you cover, like the media coverage of Joplin, or were you covering it more as a traditional reporter?
You know, I sort of put on my normal reporter hat. I tried it out because I've been trying to figure out if I can do disaster reporting. It's something I'm curious about. I don't know if I can do it. It's like having a muscle you want to try out and test it out. It was a struggle, but it was worth doing, and it did show me a lot about journalism.
Yeah.
You get on the ground and you expect there to be some functioning support, some structure, some people to help you out. There's nothing. There's not even cell service. So it was eye-opening for me in that way.
Yeah. So the fact, David Carr is a heck of a character. I mean, and the movie follows him a lot.
Yeah.
But at one point, he's introduced, I think it was to the Vice magazine guys, as a reporter from the New York Times. He says, "Forget the New York Times. Why do you keep mentioning that? What is the effect of your work being from the New York Times, how does that open up? I remember talking to Elvis Mitchell when he was the film critic for the New York Times. Says, how different is your job because now you have the New York Times behind you? And he says, Tom, the only thing that really changes is that it opens up doors that never would have been opened up. But for you, what's the impact of you saying, by the way, I'm Brian Stelter from the New York Times?
Elvis is right. People return our calls faster as a result. Now, then again, some people don't return our calls because they're afraid of the paper. You get it both sides. But generally, people are more accessible thanks to the Times.
Yeah.
And they know your work is going to be read widely. That's the value of these institutions. In an age where it's all about individuals like David Carr, like columnists, we care so much about stars in journalism these days. And I think there's real benefits to that. We still need those institutions, whether it's this station, whether it's the New York Times, those brand names that we've grown up with.
Yeah.
There's still a value to having those names because they bring with it trust and credibility.
In the movie, there's a panel that discusses what life would be like without the New York Times. I don't remember them getting a chance to run that question by you. What would we lose if we lost the New York Times?
I think what we would lose is one of the few independent fact-checking sources out there. You think about big events, whether it is a tornado in a city in Missouri, or whether it's the tsunami in Japan, or whether it's an election in some overseas country. You think there's a lot of journalists there, but there actually aren't that many journalists there.
Really?
There's probably half a dozen outlets that are willing to invest the time and money and resources and sometimes risk their lives to check the facts and get the information on the ground. It's not enough to have a video camera there. You actually have to have a notebook and a pen and a piece of paper in your hand to get the facts on the ground. And I've been reminded over the last couple of years, there's actually fewer people doing that than I think, whether it's in Libya or Syria or in these far-flung places. I think if you lose the Times, you lose one of those few outlets that's willing to do that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now here's
but we're not going to lose the New York Times.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
That's what, and that's what the movie sort of seems to imply that's that's a little ridiculous. However, you're scrambling to figure out how you're going to survive.
How do we charge?
Because that's how economically feasible is it for you or anybody else to send people to the ground to report on faraway places, especially when there may not be that much interest, in this country. The economic feasibility of the New York Times surviving is what? The paywall, the idea that now we're going to pay for our online content? Is that what's going to save you?
Well, I think it's part of the solution. It's definitely part of the solution. If you think about the model for journalism in the past, it was always about advertising and subscribers. We never just had advertising. But this weird sliver of time, this last 15 years on the internet, it was only about advertising. We thought we could give it away. Well, we were wrong. Journalism and industry was wrong. We could just give it away. So what we see now is websites like ours putting up digital subscriptions, trying to charge for our website. Seems like it's going well so far. Yeah. But we're obviously going to need people to recognize that if they want quality journalism, it's worth contributing to. Okay. I spend so much money on coffee every month. I think I can probably afford the Times website as well. It's
the least you could do. Okay, I'm getting this wrap up, so I got one last question. Compare television journalism. I mean, right now, the other sort of institution that actually has money and can send people some places, it's television. The networks, they have corporate ownership as well. What are the different roles that TV journalism plays versus newspaper journalism, or is there a difference anymore?
I don't want to use too broad a brush, but I think television oftentimes appeals more to the heart, and newspapers appeal more to the brain. Television's about accessing people's emotional stories, human stories. Television is going to always show me a disaster more effectively than a newspaper will. That's never going to change. Video really is compelling in that way. Newspapers are valuable to me because they're about data, they're about numbers, hard facts, and research. You're not going to be able to dive into the mortgage crisis in this country on television as effectively as you are on the pages of the newspaper. We need both. We can't just have one or the other. I need those emotional appeals and those factual, data-oriented appeals. I'm glad we have both, and we need both to be healthy and vibrant.
Again, I could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, you have to leave. It's great meeting you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Good luck with your career and your job.
Thank you.